October 23, 1956. The autumn sun hangs low over Budapest as thousands of university students fill the streets, their voices rising in unison, demanding something their grandparents barely remembered: freedom. What began that afternoon as a peaceful march would become one of the Cold War's most dramatic uprisings, and it would end in blood, betrayal, and a silence that lasted 3 decades. This is the story of 12 days that shook the Soviet Empire to its foundations, and it begins with a statue. Imagine standing in a crowd of 200,000 people, watching as workers with blowtorches bring down a 25-foot bronze monument to Joseph Stalin. The giant's head crashes to the pavement with a sound that echoes across the city. Someone drapes a Hungarian flag over the fallen dictator. For a moment, anything seems possible. But in Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev is watching. And within hours, the tanks will roll. To understand what happened in Budapest, we need to go back 8 months earlier. In February 1956, Khrushchev delivered what became known as the secret speech. For 4 hours, he denounced Stalin's crimes before the Soviet Communist Party. He spoke of purges, executions, the cult of personality that had gripped the nation. The speech was meant to stay secret. It didn't. Word spread through Eastern Europe like wildfire, and everywhere people began to ask, if Stalin was wrong, what else had been wrong? Hungary had suffered terribly under Stalinism. The regime of Matthias Rákosi, who called himself Stalin's best Hungarian disciple, had imprisoned tens of thousands, executed hundreds. Secret police infiltrated every workplace, every neighborhood. Children were encouraged to inform on their parents. Fear became the fabric of daily life. But by 1956, the ice was cracking. Reform-minded communists began pushing for change. Writers and intellectuals met in secret discussion circles called the Petit Circle. They discussed forbidden ideas: democracy, free press, the withdrawal of Soviet troops. And at the center of these discussions was a name that would echo through history: Imre Nagy. Nagy had served as prime minister before, a reformist who believed communism could have a human face. Moscow had removed him from power in 1955. Now, the people wanted him back. On October 23rd, the demonstration began at 3 in the afternoon. Students from Budapest's Technical University marched toward the Parliament building, their numbers swelling with every block. They carried signs demanding free elections, the withdrawal of Soviet troops, and the return of Imre Nagy. By evening, the crowd had grown to 200,000. At the radio building, demonstrators gathered to demand their 16 points of reform be broadcast. Secret police inside the building opened fire. The first blood was spilled. What happened next transformed a protest into a revolution. Hungarian soldiers, ordered to restore order, began handing their weapons to the demonstrators. Some joined the uprising themselves. Factory workers armed themselves with whatever they could find. Young men and women, some barely teenagers, formed fighting units in the industrial districts of Budapest. At the massive Stalin statue in City Park, workers arrived with cutting torches. By 9:30 that evening, the 25-foot bronze colossus lay in pieces on the ground. Only Stalin's boots remained on the pedestal, a bitter joke that would become the revolution's most enduring image. Someone placed a Hungarian flag in one of the empty boots. The next morning, October 24th, Soviet tanks entered Budapest. Over 1,000 armored vehicles rumbled through the streets, their commanders expecting to crush the uprising within hours. They were wrong. In the narrow streets of Budapest, tanks became death traps. Fighters hurled Molotov cocktails from rooftops and apartment windows. Boys and girls as young as 12 joined the resistance. The fighters called themselves freedom fighters, szabadságarcosok in Hungarian. Armed with captured weapons and homemade explosives, they brought the Soviet advance to a standstill. One of the most famous resistance strongholds was the Corvin Cinema, a movie theater that became a fortress. Fighters held it for days against repeated Soviet assaults. Under pressure from the streets and facing mounting casualties, Moscow made a stunning decision. On October 28th, Soviet forces agreed to a ceasefire and began withdrawing from Budapest. For a brief, euphoric moment, it seemed the impossible had happened. David had defeated Goliath. Imre Nagy, now reinstated as prime minister, announced sweeping reforms. Political prisoners were released. The secret police was dissolved. For the first time in years, Hungarians could speak freely without fear of midnight arrests. Then, on November 1st, Nagy made the announcement that sealed his fate and his country's. Hungary, he declared, would withdraw from the Warsaw Pact and declare neutrality. In Moscow, the Politburo had already decided. They could not allow Hungary to leave the Soviet sphere. It would encourage others. Poland, Czechoslovakia, perhaps even East Germany. 3 days later, at 4 in the morning on November 4th, the second Soviet invasion began. This time, Moscow sent overwhelming force, over 150,000 troops and more than 1,000 tanks. Nagy made one final radio broadcast to his people and to the world. His voice was steady but somber as he spoke into the microphone at 5:20 that morning. "This fight is the fight for freedom by the Hungarian people against the Russian intervention," he said. "It is possible that I shall only be able to stay at my post for 1 or 2 hours." The fighting that followed was brutal. For 6 days, vastly outnumbered Hungarians continued to resist. They fought in cellars, on rooftops, in the ruins of buildings reduced to rubble. Soviet artillery pounded Budapest's historic districts. Tanks fired point-blank into apartment buildings. The beautiful city that had survived 2 world wars was being systematically destroyed. By November 10th, organized resistance had ended. The human cost was staggering. Approximately 2,500 Hungarians killed, along with 700 Soviet soldiers. But the dying was far from over. In the weeks and months that followed, the new Soviet-installed government under János Kadar launched a wave of reprisals and mass arrests. 200,000 Hungarians fled across the border to Austria, becoming the largest refugee crisis Europe had seen since World War II. Entire families walked through minefields in the dark of night. Imre Nagy took refuge in the Yugoslav embassy, believing he had been promised safe passage. For 2 weeks, he waited there with his closest advisors. On November 22nd, Nagy left the embassy under written Soviet guarantees of his safety. The moment he stepped outside, he was arrested. The guarantee had been a lie. For 18 months, Nagy was held in Romania, interrogated, and tried in secret. He was offered clemency if he would publicly recant and denounce the revolution. He refused. On June 16, 1958, Imre Nagy was hanged in Budapest's central prison. The trial, the verdict, and the sentence were made public only after his death. He was buried in an unmarked grave, face down, his hands still bound. The authorities wanted to ensure that even in death, there would be no pilgrimage, no memorial, no memorial, no memory. Kremlin insider Fedor Berlatsky later revealed Khrushchev's reasoning. "We had Nagy executed as a lesson to all other leaders in socialist countries," he said. The message was clear: resist and die. For 31 years, official Hungary erased the revolution from memory. Textbooks called it a counter-revolution. Families who had lost loved ones were forbidden to grieve publicly. But memory is stubborn. In kitchens and living rooms, parents whispered the truth to their children. The names of the dead were kept alive in secret. And then, in 1989, the world changed. The Berlin Wall fell. Communist regimes across Eastern Europe began to collapse. Hungary was among the first to break free. On June 16, 1989, exactly 31 years after his execution, Imre Nagy was exhumed from his hidden grave and given a state funeral in Heroes Square. 250,000 people gathered to honor him. Among them was a young law student named Viktor Orbán, who gave a fiery speech demanding Soviet troops leave Hungary. The reburial of Imre Nagy became a turning point. Within months, Hungary had dismantled the Iron Curtain along its border with Austria. The path to democracy was open at last. Looking back, historians debate why the West did nothing to help Hungary in 1956. The answer lies in terrible timing and cold calculation. At the exact moment Soviet tanks were crushing Budapest, British and French forces were invading Egypt over the Suez Canal. The world's attention was elsewhere. President Eisenhower, running for re-election that very week, refused to risk nuclear war over Hungary. The Soviets had atomic weapons. Budapest was not worth the end of the world. Some argue that Radio Free Europe, broadcasting from West Germany, had encouraged Hungarians to revolt with implicit promises of support that never came. The moral calculus remains painful. The 70th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution falls on October 23, 2026. If you want to understand this history more deeply, several resources await. Visit the House of Terror Museum in Budapest, located in the former headquarters of both the Nazi and Soviet secret police. The building itself is a monument to the suffering it once housed. Read Victor Sebastian's 12 Days, the story of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. Written by a Hungarian-born journalist, it remains the definitive English-language account. The documentary 1956, The Year That Changed the World, provides remarkable archival footage, much of it smuggled out of Hungary during the uprising itself. Many cities with Hungarian communities will hold commemorative events in October 2026. Check with local Hungarian cultural organizations to find one near you. If you can, visit Budapest in late October. Walk the streets where the fighting happened. Stand in Heroes' Square where Imre Nagy was finally honored. History becomes real in places. The legacy of 1956 remains complicated in today's Hungary. The revolution is officially celebrated as a national holiday, but interpretations of its meaning continue to evolve. What is not debated is the courage of those who stood against tanks with homemade weapons, or the price paid by those who believed freedom was worth dying for. 12 days. That's all it lasted. The moment when ordinary people proved that even the mightiest empire could be shaken by those who refused to be afraid. The Soviets crushed the revolution, but not the memory. 3 decades later, that memory helped bring down the Iron Curtain itself. Ideas, it turns out, are harder to kill than men. Imre Nagy's last words in court were simple. "I have twice tried to save the honor and image of communism. I do not have to reproach myself." He was right. If this story moved you, share it with someone who should know. The best way to honor the dead is to remember why they died. Until next time, this has been History That Hits.